You need to understand something that most people will never truly accept because it destroys the fantasy they are comfortable living in. People want dramatic change. They want a moment where everything shifts instantly. They want to wake up one morning and suddenly feel like a different person, like all their problems have been erased, like discipline has magically entered their body, like success has decided to finally choose them. But life does not work on fantasy logic. Life works on accumulation. Life works on repetition. Life works on what you do when nothing is exciting, when nobody is clapping, when there is no emotional reward, when it is just you and your decisions. The 1% rule is not a motivational idea. It is a reality principle. It is the understanding that transformation is not built through intensity alone, but through consistency so small that most people ignore it, so subtle that it feels meaningless in the moment, but so powerful that over time it becomes unstoppable. And this is exactly why most people fail. They dismiss small actions. They underestimate repetition. They think if something is not dramatic, it is not important. That belief is what keeps them stuck in the same version of themselves for years. If you improve by 1% today, it does not feel like anything significant. You will not wake up tomorrow and suddenly feel like a champion. You will not look in the mirror and see a completely different person. You will not suddenly have wealth, status, or dominance. But that is the mistake people make. They judge progress by immediate emotional feedback. They want proof too fast, and when they do not feel the reward instantly, they assume nothing is happening. So they stop. They quit right at the moment where momentum was supposed to begin building. The truth is 1% improvement is invisible at first. It is microscopic. It is almost insulting to your ego because your ego wants something big. It wants transformation that feels impressive. But real growth does not care about your ego. Real growth cares about direction. If you are slightly better today than you were yesterday, even if that improvement is so small that you cannot measure it emotionally, you are still moving forward. And forward movement, when repeated daily, becomes something far beyond what people expect. Think about how most people live. They repeat the same habits every single day without questioning them. They wake up at the same time, think the same thoughts, eat the same way, consume the same content, talk to the same people, and wonder why their life does not change. But they are not living one day repeated. They are living one decision repeated thousands of times. That repetition becomes identity, and identity becomes destiny. So if your habits are not improving, your life cannot improve. There is no exception to that rule. The 1% rule forces you to become aware of something uncomfortable. It forces you to realize that your life is not controlled by massive events. It is controlled by small choices you barely notice. The decision to scroll instead of study. The decision to stay in bed instead of getting up. The decision to delay instead of act. The decision to consume instead of create. Each one feels small. Each one feels harmless, but they stack. And what stacks over time becomes your reality. Now imagine reversing that process. Imagine choosing improvement in the smallest possible ways. Not dramatic change, not extreme transformation, just slightly better decisions. Reading one extra page when you normally would stop. Doing one extra set when you feel like quitting. Thinking a little more carefully before reacting emotionally. Waking up 5 minutes earlier than yesterday. Choosing focus for 10 extra minutes. These things sound insignificant. But insignificance repeated becomes dominance. Most people underestimate this because they are addicted to visible results. They want proof they can show others. But the 1% rule does not care about visibility. It cares about trajectory. And trajectory is everything. If your direction is correct, even if your speed is slow, you will eventually reach places that people who are moving fast in the wrong direction will never reach. This is where discipline begins to form, not as a dramatic lifestyle change, but as a quiet internal shift. Discipline is not about intensity. It is about repetition without negotiation. It is the ability to do what needs to be done even when your emotions are not aligned with it. And the 1% rule trains this identity in the most subtle way possible. It does not demand perfection. It demands consistency. It does not require extreme effort. It requires honest effort. The reason most people never experience this compounding effect is because they break the chain too early. They try for 2 or 3 days, maybe a week, and when they do not see immediate transformation, they conclude that it is not working. But compounding does not reveal itself quickly. It builds silently. It builds in the background. It builds in a way that is almost unfair, because by the time people realize what is happening, you are already far ahead of them. Every expert, every high performer, every person who seems naturally successful is actually just someone who respected small improvements longer than everyone else. That is the difference. Not talent, not luck, not opportunity, just endurance and small actions. The willingness to repeat what others find boring. The ability to stay consistent in things that do not feel exciting anymore. And here is what becomes dangerous in a positive way when you apply this principle correctly. Your standards start rising without force. You stop tolerating your old habits. You stop accepting your previous level of laziness. You begin to notice inefficiencies in your behavior. You become aware of wasted time. You start correcting yourself without external pressure. That is when growth stops being something you do and starts becoming something you are. At that stage, even failure becomes part of the process, not a setback. Because when you are operating under the 1% rule, failure is not destruction. It is adjustment, it is feedback, it is information. You do not collapse emotionally when something goes wrong, because your identity is not tied to one outcome. Your identity is tied to progress itself. So even a bad day is still a day of learning, still a day of slight improvement, still a day where you can extract something useful and move forward again. Most people never reach this mindset because they are stuck thinking in extremes. They think either they are winning completely or losing completely. Either they are successful or failures. Either they are motivated or useless. But the 1% rule removes that illusion. It shows you that life is not binary. It is incremental. It is gradual. It is built in layers that stack quietly until the structure becomes undeniable. When you begin to live like this, your perception of time changes. A single day no longer feels meaningless. A single hour no longer feels like something to waste, because you understand that each small unit of time is a chance to move forward slightly. And when you respect time at that level, your entire approach to life becomes sharper, more deliberate, more controlled. Even your identity starts shifting in ways you did not expect. You stop saying, "I will try." You start acting. You stop negotiating with excuses. You start removing them. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You start working with what is available. And slowly, without dramatic realization, you become someone who operates differently from the majority. The most important part of the 1% rule is not the improvement itself, but the discipline it builds underneath it. Because once discipline becomes your default state, you are no longer dependent on motivation, environment, or emotion. You become someone who continues regardless of circumstances. You have to understand something that most people will never realize in time. And because they never realize it, they spend their entire lives busy but not progressing, occupied but not evolving, distracted but not improving. And the reason is simple but uncomfortable. They do not control their focus. Their focus is controlled for them by their phone, by their environment, by their emotions, by their impulses, by whatever is the loudest in the moment. And when your focus is not yours, your life is not yours either. Focus is not just a skill. Focus is your real currency. It is more valuable than money, more powerful than talent, more important than opportunity. Because whatever you consistently focus on becomes the direction of your life. And the direction of your life determines your destination. Most people think wealth is built only in bank accounts, but real wealth is built in attention. Where you place your attention is where your energy goes. And where your energy goes is what grows. Look at the average person today. Their attention is fragmented. They wake up and immediately reach for their phone. Before they even think clearly, their mind is already being filled with notifications, opinions, videos, noise, arguments, entertainment, and endless comparison. Their brain does not even get a moment to stabilize before it is pulled into 100 different directions. And then they wonder why they feel mentally tired all the time, why they feel like they are doing so much but achieving so little, why their day feels full but their life feels empty. That is the consequence of stolen focus. And it does not happen suddenly. It happens gradually, slowly, one scroll at a time, one distraction at a time, just 5 minutes at a time. And before you realize it, your ability to stay locked into anything meaningful has been weakened. You start something important, but your mind drifts. You try to read, but you get restless. You try to work, but you feel the urge to check something else. Not because you are incapable, but because your focus has been trained to jump, not stay. And this is the truth most people avoid. Your attention is being trained every single day, whether you realize it or not. If you train it on distraction, it becomes weak in discipline. If you train it on entertainment, it becomes addicted to stimulation. If you train it on shortcuts, it becomes allergic to effort. But if you train it on meaningful work, even for small periods, it becomes sharper, stronger, more controlled. Focus is not about working harder. It is about removing everything that does not deserve your attention. And that is where most people struggle, because removing distractions feels uncomfortable. It feels like loss at first. When you stop giving attention to entertainment, you feel bored. When you stop reacting to every notification, you feel disconnected. When you stop jumping between tasks, your mind initially resists, because your mind has been trained for chaos, not order. But here is what you need to understand. That discomfort is not weakness. That discomfort is withdrawal. You are pulling your attention back from everything that has been feeding on it, and anything that loses its supply reacts. That is why your mind tries to convince you to check your phone, to take a break, to switch tasks, to do something easier. It is not logic, it is habit fighting for survival, and this is where most people fail. They surrender to that discomfort. They mistake resistance for inability. They assume because it feels hard, it must be wrong. But the truth is the opposite. Anything that demands your focus is going to feel hard at first because your attention has been scattered for so long. But the more you resist distraction, the more your focus strengthens. And the stronger your focus becomes, the easier meaningful work feels. Now think about what happens when someone gains control over their focus. They become dangerous in the best way. Not because they are doing more things, but because they are finally doing fewer things with full intensity. They can sit with one task and actually complete it. They can think deeply without interruption. They can build momentum without losing it every 5 minutes. And momentum is where real progress begins. Most people never experience momentum because they reset themselves constantly. Every distraction resets their mental state. Every interruption breaks their flow. Every switch of attention forces their brain to start again from zero. So they spend their entire day starting and restarting, never building anything long enough to compound into something meaningful. But when focus becomes stable, something different happens. Time starts to expand. Hours feel more productive. Work feels clearer. Decisions feel simpler. Not because life got easier, but because your mind stopped leaking energy into irrelevant things. And when energy stops leaking, it starts accumulating. And accumulated energy becomes power. Focus is also the foundation of discipline. Because discipline is not just about forcing yourself to do things. It is about directing your attention so precisely that distractions lose influence over you. A disciplined person is not someone who fights temptation all day. A disciplined person is someone whose focus is so strong that temptation becomes irrelevant. And that is a level most people never reach because they never train attention intentionally. They assume focus is something you either have or don't have. But focus is trained like a muscle. It strengthens through controlled resistance. The ability to stay with one task for 10 minutes, then 20, then 30, without checking out mentally, without escaping into something easier, that is how focus is built. Not in theory, but in repetition. And when you begin to experience even small wins in focus, something shifts internally. You start to notice how often you used to waste time without realizing it. You start to become aware of how many times you use distraction as a comfort mechanism. You start catching yourself before you slip into autopilot. And this awareness itself is powerful because most people operate unconsciously. They do not even realize they are distracted. They just feel busy, but awareness changes everything. Once you see where your attention is going, you gain the ability to redirect it. And every time you redirect it back to something meaningful, you are training control. And control over attention is control over life. Because you cannot build anything meaningful without sustained focus. Not wealth, not skills, not discipline, not mastery, even success in any field, whether business, fitness, learning, or relationships, comes down to one thing: how long can you stay locked in without giving up mentally? Because the world rewards depth, not scattering. It rewards people who go deep into something instead of jumping across everything. And the irony is that focus feels restrictive at first, but it actually creates freedom. Because when you can control your attention, you are no longer controlled by impulse. You are no longer reacting to everything around you. You are no longer pulled in different directions by every emotional trigger or external stimulus. You become centered. And that centered state is where clarity exists. Without focus, your mind becomes noisy. With focus, your mind becomes sharp. And a sharp mind does not struggle with decisions. It does not waste energy on confusion. It does not overthink every small thing. It simply directs itself toward what matters and executes. But to reach that state, you must go through the uncomfortable phase where your old habits resist you, where distraction feels stronger than discipline, where silence feels uncomfortable, where doing one thing feels unnatural. And most people interpret that phase as failure, when in reality it is transition. It is the breaking of old mental patterns. And if you persist through that phase, even slightly, even imperfectly, your focus begins to stabilize. And once it stabilizes, everything else becomes easier, not because the world changed, but because you stop scattering your energy across everything that does not matter. You need to understand something that most people refuse to accept because it removes their excuse. Motivation is not what builds anything meaningful in your life. Motivation is not reliable. Motivation is not consistent. Motivation is not even real in the way people think it is. It is a temporary emotional spike that appears when something feels exciting, inspiring, or new. And then it disappears the moment reality demands effort, discomfort, repetition, or patience. And yet, most people build their entire approach to life around motivation, which is exactly why they stay stuck in cycles of starting and stopping, never actually building anything solid. Discipline is the opposite of motivation. Discipline does not care how you feel. Discipline does not ask for permission. Discipline does not wait for perfect timing. Discipline is what you do when your mind says no, but your decision says yes. And this is where real growth begins, not in emotional moments of inspiration, but in silent decisions made when nobody is watching and nothing feels rewarding. Most people misunderstand discipline completely. They think discipline is something extreme, something reserved for elite performers or highly driven individuals. But discipline is not about intensity. Discipline is about consistency. It is about showing up even when nothing inside you wants to show up. It is about doing the same basic actions repeatedly until they become part of your identity. And identity is where growth actually happens. Not in motivation, not in inspiration, but in repetition that shapes who you become. Think about how your current habits were formed. You did not become who you are today in one moment. You became this version of yourself through repeated actions, repeated choices, repeated responses. Every time you chose comfort over effort, that choice shaped your pattern. Every time you delayed something important, that delay reinforced your behavior. Every time you avoided difficulty, your mind learned avoidance. And over time, those repeated actions became automatic. That is identity. And identity is far stronger than motivation. This is why people struggle to change. They try to rely on motivation to override an identity that was built over years. It does not work. You cannot overwrite repetition with emotion. You can only overwrite repetition with new repetition. That is the real meaning of discipline. It is not a feeling. It is not a phase. It is a system of consistent action that slowly replaces your old identity with a stronger one. And this process is uncomfortable at the beginning because discipline requires you to act without reward. It requires you to continue without validation. It requires you to move forward even when nothing feels like it is changing. And most people quit during this phase because they expect immediate feedback. They expect effort to feel rewarding instantly. But discipline does not work on immediate reward. Discipline works on delayed transformation. Imagine someone starting a new routine. They decide to wake up early, train harder, focus more, and eliminate distractions. The first few days feel powerful because everything is new. There is excitement, there is emotional energy. But after that initial phase disappears, reality sets in. Waking up early starts feeling difficult. Training starts feeling repetitive. Focus starts feeling forced. And distractions start feeling more attractive again. That is the moment where most people quit. Not because they cannot continue, but because they are no longer emotionally supported by motivation. But the people who succeed are not the ones who feel motivated. They are the ones who continue even when motivation disappears. They understand that discipline is not supposed to feel good in the moment. It is supposed to create something meaningful in the long term. And that long-term thinking is what separates growth from stagnation. Growth always demands discomfort. There is no version of improvement that feels completely easy. If it feels easy, it is not growth. It is maintenance. Growth requires resistance. It requires pushing against your current limits. It requires doing things your current version of yourself resists. And discipline is the mechanism that allows you to move through that resistance without relying on emotional energy. Most people live inside a cycle controlled by how they feel. If they feel good, they act. If they feel tired, they stop. If they feel bored, they switch. If they feel unmotivated, they quit. That is not discipline. That is emotional dependency. And emotional dependency is the reason most people never reach consistency, because emotions are unstable. They change constantly, and anything built on instability will also be unstable. Discipline breaks that cycle. Discipline introduces structure into chaos. It allows you to act regardless of emotional fluctuations. It teaches your mind that actions are not negotiable. And once your mind accepts that, something powerful happens. You stop debating with yourself. You stop negotiating with excuses. You stop waiting for permission. You simply act, and this shift is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is internal. It is quiet. It is the moment where you stop asking, "Do I feel like doing this?" and start asking, "Does this need to be done?" That single shift changes everything. Because now your decisions are no longer based on temporary emotion, but on long-term direction. The reason discipline is so powerful is because it compounds. Just like small improvements compound, disciplined actions compound into identity. Every time you act despite resistance, you strengthen your ability to act again in the future. Every time you ignore excuses, you weaken their influence. Every time you complete something you tried to avoid, you rewire your response system. And over time, discipline becomes natural, not forced. At that point, you are no longer relying on motivation at all. You no longer need external inspiration to move. You no longer depend on mood. You become someone who acts by default. And that is when real transformation begins. Because now your life is no longer dependent on emotional cycles. It is built on consistent behavior. And here is something most people do not realize. Discipline does not just change your actions, it changes your self-respect. Because every time you keep a promise to yourself, even a small one, you strengthen your internal trust. And every time you break a promise to yourself, even a small one, you weaken that trust. Most people do not notice this internal erosion. They think missing one day or skipping one task is harmless. But internally, it reinforces the belief that they cannot rely on themselves. And that belief is more damaging than the missed action itself. When discipline becomes your foundation, your entire mindset shifts. You stop thinking like someone who hopes for change and start thinking like someone who creates change. You stop waiting for external circumstances to align and start building regardless of circumstances. You stop identifying as someone trying to improve and start identifying as someone who is already improving through action. And the most important part of discipline is that it removes emotional dependency from your life. You are no longer controlled by how you feel in the morning, in the afternoon, or at night. You are no longer vulnerable to emotional highs and lows. You become stable. And stability is power, because stable people can build, stable people can endure, stable people can continue when others collapse. And that continuity is what creates results that look impossible to those who depend on motivation. What looks like talent from the outside is often just discipline repeated long enough to become visible. There is no shortcut to this process. There is no emotional trick that replaces it. There is no mindset hack that bypasses it. Growth demands discipline because discipline is the only thing that survives reality. Motivation fades under pressure. Emotion disappears under difficulty, but discipline remains. And what remains is what builds your life. Everything you have heard comes down to one simple reality that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Your life is not shaped by one big moment, one lucky break, or one sudden transformation. It is shaped by repetition. It is shaped by attention. And it is shaped by discipline that continues even when nothing feels exciting. The 1% rule is not about doing everything at once. It is about refusing to stay the same. It is about understanding that small improvements, when repeated daily, create a version of you that cannot be compared to who you are today. But only if you respect them enough to stay consistent when results are not visible. Focus is what turns potential into direction. Without focus, you scatter your energy across distractions and wonder why nothing grows. With focus, even ordinary effort becomes powerful because it is no longer divided. It becomes sharp, intentional, and directed towards something meaningful, and discipline is what makes all of it real. Not motivation, not inspiration, not emotion. Discipline is the bridge between who you are and who you are capable of becoming. It is the decision to continue when comfort says stop. It is the ability to stay committed when feelings change. It is the identity of someone who does not negotiate with excuses. Most people will hear these ideas and feel inspired for a moment, but inspiration alone changes nothing. What changes everything is what happens after the inspiration fades. What you choose to do when nobody is watching. What you repeat when there is no reward. What you build when progress feels slow, because in the end, your future self is not created by your intentions. It is created by your actions. And every action you take today is either reinforcing the same life or building a better one. The 1% rule rewards those who stay consistent when it feels pointless. Focus rewards those who protect their attention when distraction is easier. Discipline rewards those who act when motivation disappears, and the combination of all three is what separates a life of repetition from a life of growth